Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and this week we're saying farewell to a fixture on the Rhode Island media landscape. The alt weekly Providence Phoenix has just published its final issue. You see it there on its screen. After 35 years, the news came as a shock to many people in Rhode Island's media, political, arts communities, and many regular folks who'd read the Phoenix for many years. And my guest today is going to help explain to us what happened and what it all means. Philip Isle, he's the news editor, the final news editor of the Providence Phoenix. And Phil, my condolences on this. I'm one of the heartbroken readers here, but I appreciate you joining me to sort of explain what happened.
Thanks for having me by.
So let's just start with the story. We're reporters. How did you find out the Phoenix was closing?
I found out on a Wednesday. Well, we were putting out an issue, one of our second to last issue. The cover story was about the Newport Grand table game expansion ballot question. And the morning I came in to do my final fact-checking, final copy editing, my regular Wednesday morning routine, and I usually go home after that because I do a lot of my work from home after the paper has been put out. I had kind of a nondescript email saying there's a meeting in the conference room at 4:30, please don't go, stick around. And to give you a sense of the mood at the paper before that, just the tone of that email made me think maybe I shouldn't work on next week's issue, as I usually do.
So
I think
it was in the back of your mind a little bit.
Yeah. The last such meeting we had, which was in December of 2013, had involved some kind of belt tightening, pay cut type thing. So I didn't think it was going to be good news. And in fact, it was news about the closing of the paper. Luckily, I will say, or I don't know what the right word is, but it was wonderful, wonderful. And I thank the owners of the paper that we were able to put a farewell issue out. I get the sense we may talk about the San Francisco Bay Guardian a bit later in the half hour. And
just so people know, that's another alt weekly that coincidentally has closed this same week and when you actually worked at, I know.
Right, and I was reading articles about them, and they had to be escorted to even go to the bathroom. It was kind of lights out, gotta go, no farewell issue, very abrupt. We had a week to put together an issue that I'm really proud of, and I've been really happy to see the way people have responded to it.
How big was the Phoenix as an enterprise in the end? How many people have lost their jobs? And also, how much support did you have? How many people was it? I know a lot of times felt like it was mostly you putting these issues together with a lot of help and a lot of freelancers, but.
The final number of Providence Phoenix employees, I believe, was 14, which includes salespeople, designers, finance people, 2 full-time editorial people. There's a guy behind the scenes who has been behind the scenes for literally decades named Lou Papineau, managing editor, who I just want to give the biggest shout out and thank you to. This is a guy, and I'm really thankful a lot of people in their testimonials gave Lou credit. I mean, he was really the engine behind the paper. He was there from almost the very beginning. So there were 2 of us editorially. Lou would lay out the paper. Back in the day, he would physically lay it out, and he would work with the arts reviewers and edit that stuff. He also had a beer column. And I would edit/wrangle Philippe and Jorge every week, Rudy Cheeks and Chip Young, for those of you who aren't familiar. And I would also, one name that I don't think was attached to my job title, which should have been, was staff writer, because the news editor at the Phoenix was a staff writer, and it wasn't. I didn't invent that. David Scharfenberg was the staff writer. Ian Donis was the staff writer. My 2 predecessors. Back, I think maybe for a few years in the late '90s, we actually had an additional staff writer for a little while. But in the news department, I was putting out cover stories and soliciting pitches from freelancers, and that was how it went.
You wrote a poignant, basically a eulogy, and again, maybe we can show the cover of the final issue again for this farewell edition. It's out on the streets now, though I'm hearing it's going fast, so I don't know if people will be able to find it if they want to go find it, but there it is. Keep an eye out.
It is free. It's not like going fast for a purchased item, but yes.
True, that's true. You can take as many as you want.
I was behind someone in a store yesterday who took about 5, and I didn't.
What can you do? It's free. It is what it is, right? But you wrote a eulogy for the paper, I would say, about looking back and everything. And the first thing you mentioned really struck me. You interviewed for the job as news editor when you took over as David Scharfenberg. The same week, the Boston Phoenix, which was the sister paper of the Providence Phoenix, was shutting down itself, which happened 1.5 years ago. Right. So did you always expect, coming in that environment, the paper was not long for this world?
I wouldn't say I expected it. That would have hurt, I think, the attitude and the energy I brought to the job every day. Even if I maybe deep down knew it, I couldn't go around thinking that that was the case. But that said, when you're interviewed in a recently abandoned office from a paper that is closed down that was related to the paper you're being interviewed for, and the person who interviews you as you're walking out says, you know, you're the last person to interview for a job in this office, that's certainly, and I don't blame Peter Katzis for saying that. I'm immensely grateful to him for giving me this dream job that I had for 18 months. But nevertheless, that mood was certainly memorable enough that, you know, I mentioned it at the beginning of my piece. It's certainly set a tone.
As frankly as you can say it, what went wrong? Why in the end did the Phoenix have to close this week after more than 3 decades?
Well, as folks who follow media know, and specifically folks who follow this kind of media, alternative weekly newspapers, I don't think it's overstating it to say I think folks will look back on this as a somewhat historic week, not just because the Providence Phoenix closed, but literally within days of the announcement of our closing, we heard about the San Francisco Bay Guardian, a much bigger, older paper out in San Francisco, closing. We also heard about the Knoxville, Tennessee Metro Pulse closing, 3, and including, you know, those 2 papers in Tennessee and California were one day after another. So for people who follow this, it was just kind of like a whoa, like dominoes seemed to be falling. What went wrong? I mean, as our kind of COO and owner said in our press release, the economics, I don't want to say don't work, period, anymore, although in the case of the Providence Phoenix, they didn't, because other alt weeklies are making it happen somehow. I don't know what their books look like, but the economics aren't the same. I brought up kind of a prop today.
Yeah, let's show people. Let's hold it up high in front of you.
This is really an amazing document. This is our summer 1993 Providence Phoenix guide, summer guide.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have the resolution, but
it's very thick. I'm trying to get it in there. Sorry, camera folks. There we go. I mean, this looks like a Sunday New York Times. Yeah, tell me about why it's important to you.
Well, if at the top it says 6 sections, 216 pages, largest issue ever. I mentioned it in my farewell piece because it has such heft to it. I actually took it over to our mail scale and weighed it. It weighs over 1 pound. And just for comparison, this is our most recent 2014 summer guide, which is a really big issue for us in the last year. And this is 60 pages.
Yeah.
And this is one of the biggest issues we put out all year.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is that weight? What are those pages they're missing? Advertisements. And content that you can create with advertising money. Jack Schaefer, who was a former Alt Weekly editor, wrote in a piece for Reuters, he really laid it out pretty simply and clearly. The Alt Weekly collapse came in spurts over the last decade, he said, but classifieds had amounted to anywhere between 20% to 50% of revenues. Now that money is mostly gone. He was talking about Alt Weeklies. So the things you see now advertised on Craigslist, that's a big one, used to be advertised in the Phoenix. The services provided by something like OkCupid, the dating site, you used to do that in the Phoenix, personal ads. We had a testimonial from a Providence Journal reporter in our farewell issue who met his wife via the Phoenix. And he said, my kids wouldn't be here were it not for this paper. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, we just, like a lot of other print outlets, saw a disappearance and a migration of advertising money into our paper, going in any number of different places out of our paper, mostly onto
and the bottom just falls out of the business model at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Phil Isle about the response to the news that the Providence Phoenix is closing and some of the other projects he's working on. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and we're talking this week with the final news editor of the late lamented Providence Phoenix, which is shutting its doors this week after more than 35 years publishing in Rhode Island. And everything old is new again in Rhode Island. Here is the, let's see, this is when, the best of 78. So this is the final issue of 1978, and that is independent mayoral candidate Buddy Cianci. At the time, he was the Republican mayor of Providence in 1978. And you see the Phoenix with an illustration you might not have seen in the Providence Journal of 1978.
And that, just for people who don't know, the new paper was the predecessor to the Phoenix. The Boston Phoenix purchased the new paper in 1988, and it eventually renamed it the Providence Phoenix.
The Providence Phoenix when it became part of things. So an interesting thing, this is a business show, and you and I have been going back and forth, and we were talking about a New Yorker piece about the San Francisco Alt Weekly that you mentioned, probably. And one thing the owner of the parent company said basically was that sort of the progressive anti-establishment politics of an alt weekly make it hard to get advertising. He said they have such an incredible voice. The problem is that voice knocks down a lot of things that you would sell advertising to. It's very hard when you can't go to big customers because the voice is against them. Do you think that's a real problem for alt weeklies?
I think it's a problem. I don't think it's what brought this paper or other papers down. I think it's more the issues we talked about in the first segment about classifieds going to Craigslist, about eyeballs going elsewhere, to BuzzFeed, to Facebook, to wherever. I think there's probably a grain of truth in that, but even later in that article, the people who wrote for the paper that this guy who said that owned said, that wasn't really what it was. I mean, I think it's probably somewhat of a tough sell when alt weeklies, the thing I was going to say we sold, but it was a free paper. The thing we delivered was coming out swinging, was calling people out on
swearing.
Yeah, I was going to swear, but you can't swear on this show.
No, FCC license.
Was calling people out on BS, which included potential advertisers. I don't know the full story of whether the Providence Phoenix lost advertisers over time due to things we wrote. It may have happened, but I don't think it was the main thing that brought us down.
Do you think, the other question, and something Jack Schaefer's written about too, is the idea that maybe alt weeklies have just become kind of obsolete in an age of Gawker and blogs and social media. And we're talking about this 1978 paper, we're talking about a time when it was really just the Providence Journal, and this was an actual opposing voice, whereas now we can all tweet back at the Journal or blog about it or whatnot. What do you think of that argument?
Well, it's tough not to look at this week, 3 alt weeklies in 1 week shuttering, and think that there's something to that. Now, this is going to sound romantic or whatever. The spirit is never going to be obsolete. The spirit of looking for voices that aren't being heard elsewhere, the spirit of championing the arts, the spirit of commenting on other media outlets, that is not obsolete. I tweeted this week, the economics of the paper gave out, but the thing that it did, the way it moved people and inspired people and provoked people and angered people, that didn't die. People are still responding to the paper, online right now. The economics didn't work. The idea of it in terms of the content, I think, is still very much alive and has, migrated or gone elsewhere to various blogs. I mean, I quote in the beginning of my piece all of the Boston Phoenix alumni who have gone to illustrious careers in any number of other places, from Charlie Pierce at Esquire and Grantland to Susan Orlean at The New Yorker, David Edelstein at New York, the list goes on and on.
What do you think will be lost in Providence with the Phoenix being gone? You could tell from the outpouring of comments and people, especially in the arts community, this feeling that no, there isn't. There will be a vacuum. I mean, what do you think? What do you think won't be there? What do you think you guys are doing that might not be getting done now?
Every week for the last 36 years, there were numerous news articles, many of them discussing politics. There were numerous arts and culture reviews. There was political commentary, and it lived in this paper, and which was distributed across the state. So we're losing those things I just described. We're literally losing them every week. There will be that much less conversation about what's going on at the General Assembly, what's going on at the RISD Museum, what's going on at AS220, what's going on with I-195 land. That was a story I was going to write. I won't tick off all the other stories I was going to write. One more, when will we legalize marijuana in Rhode Island? I didn't get a chance to write those stories, and maybe I will somewhere else, but we're missing a place for a conversation that was really valuable to a lot of people, as we've seen with the response. I ticked off a number of other things we're missing, and I would certainly encourage people, if you can, grab a copy of this. I don't know if you already held this up, but the farewell issue.
Yep.
It's certainly online for a little while. We're losing a media commentator, as I already said. We're losing two really distinct voices in Philippe and Jorge. Sherbert Whitebread for Sheldon Whitehouse was one of their famous nicknames, which Sheldon Whitehouse actually sent us a video testimonial accepting and embracing during our 35th anniversary party. So he doesn't mind that, apparently. We're losing, I also say in the piece, a vigorous advocate for free speech and transparency. I'm really proud of the fact that I think our third to last issue was called Public Information 101. It was myself and other reporters and good government advocates in the state giving people tips on here's where you go and find political campaign contributions. Here's where you go online and find what state employees make. Here's where you go find court records. I didn't package it in the piece as, here are some things for you to do after we are gone.
Yeah.
But it kind of reads like that piece now. I mean, the list goes on, and I certainly tick off a number of things of what we'll miss.
All right, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more with Phil Isle about the Providence Phoenix's closing and also some of the other projects he's working on. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and we're talking this week with Phil Isle about the final days of the Providence Phoenix, which has published its final issue. It's on newsstands and in the corner of your liquor stores and everywhere you can find the Phoenix now, though people are scooping them up in piles. Yeah. So you really want to grab one if you see one and you want to have a copy of that, and I encourage you to do so. Phil, you held this job for a year and a half. You wrote quite a few stories that got people talking. You did a closer look at Alex and Ani that I found fascinating. Yeah. You examined why the Rhode Island Democratic Party doesn't have a party platform and a few other things. So I'm curious, because especially since you didn't come to this job from a traditional news background, what surprised you? What stuck out to you that you learned over your time as the editor?
Well, I think we're going to talk about political stuff. I started at the Phoenix really as an arts and culture reporter, writing arguably lighter fare. And then when I became news editor, took a close look at what was going on politically in the state. And as you've said, there were a number of things that surprised me and then maybe disappointed me and then just flat out infuriated me. I'm 29 years old. I'm a guy who returned to Rhode Island after graduate school and traveling around a little bit to find the 38 Studios thing happening. And that was a real moment, which I finally got a chance to do a cover story on recently. Spoiler alert, we haven't really had any accountability. And I looked at that, and that was such a widespread scandal on such a large scale that really seemed to kind of swallow up the state. And that was something where I was like, whoa, what happened? And I still don't really know.
We still don't know. That's part of the problem.
So there's that. There are smaller things like the fact that the Rhode Island State Democratic Party, Democrats, I looked this up for this article, are something like 90% of the General Assembly. And yet, unlike any other state Democratic Party in New England, until recently, they didn't post a party platform, i.e. what they believe in and stand for, online. You couldn't find it. So I emailed them and said, do you guys have a platform? And they sent me something that claimed to be from 2008, but referred to the Clinton administration in the present tense. So that was something I said, okay, these are the guys who essentially run the state, and they're basically telling me we don't have any shared set of beliefs. Smaller things. Before Gordon Fox, the then Speaker of the House's office, was raided and he resigned, he paid some ethics violation fees, and his excuse or explanation was that it had been complicated paperwork. Here's a guy who's not only an attorney, but the people who we pay to deal with complicated paperwork, but he was the Speaker of the House, most powerful guy in the state, claiming that the paperwork was too complicated. Well, that's politics, is complicated paperwork, right? So, I mean, just the more I dove into it, the angrier I got. I have a Google document called Things I'm Angry About. I literally made this in the event that I didn't have anything to write about that week.
Just pick one off and be angry about it.
Yeah. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, that's the story being a reporter in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure we have time to talk about what you're planning to do next. Obviously, you've had some irons in the fire all through your time at the Phoenix. And I know you have a book project you're working on. Tell us a little about that.
I actually have 2 book projects.
True, right.
One is a true crime project that I was working on. The elevator pitch is basically a guy that my dad went to college and medical school with is currently serving 4 life terms in federal prison for prescription drug dealing. I learned about this almost literally 5 years ago, wrote the guy a letter before he had been put on trial and then convicted, said basically, can I interview you? I had been a huge fan, still am, of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. This was kind of a story that had that size stakes. I mean, numerous of, over 15 of his patients died from overdoses, according to prosecutors. He would dispute that. And I basically fell down a rabbit hole of figuring out what went wrong in this guy's life, what the story of the town in which he was practicing / drug dealing, depending on who you believe was, and this whole strange world of chronic pain management and pain pills. If you walk into a bookstore, in my experience, you won't find a true crime book about prescription drugs that's written in the last 10 years, 15 years, and I find that kind of really surprising, and I think there's really an opportunity that I was working on this story to tell a really sweeping true crime story.
So you're
about
publishing it?
What's that?
You're near publishing it?
Well, there's a catch, which is the evidence from his trial, which I now know is 15,000 some odd pages of material, is currently making its way imperceptibly slowly, or was imperceptible speed, through the Drug Enforcement Administration's FOIA office, which would be a whole nother 2-hour show for me to vent on.
Let me have you hit on, before we have maybe about 40 seconds left, the other idea for an anthology of writing about Providence. Tell me about that.
I brought some props with me.
Yeah, hold it high.
Is an anthology of writing about the city of New York. Here's another one for Cleveland. I was and will now resume working on compiling and editing a similar anthology for the city of Providence. Just an anthology basically of the best stuff ever written about the city, published, collected in one place. I taught a class at RISD about the literary history of Providence a few years ago and found that I was running all over the place trying to find this stuff, and I thought it'd be fun to save somebody else the work and to compile all this stuff, pay for the rights, figure out all the publication stuff, and put it all together in a handsome volume like one of these.
Boy, I'd love to read that. You think you get it done?
I hope so. That's the plan.
You have time now, I guess.
I do have some time.
All right, Phil, we'll look forward to that. I'll have you back when you have that coming out.
Thanks,
Phil
Ted.
Isle, news editor of the Providence Phoenix. Again, the final issue, it's out on newsstands now, but it's going fast, so grab it there or check out his final article online. It's a really good read. Be sure to tune in next week. My guest will be Rob Atkinson, the former head of the Rhode Island Economic Policy Council. He's back in town, along with Lori White from the Chamber of Commerce. Missed any of this show or any other episode, you can catch all those on our website, WPRI.com. See you next week on Executive Suite.